Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Agasicles Stamas from GearWorks.com and the E2KG Network podcasting channel on YouTube, here with the first episode of What's Your Issue? It's actually our third comic book podcast episode on the network, and my co-host and partner in crime, Steven, has done even more. So we've recorded the comic book podcast a few times, but we've been fooling around with rebranding. Fortunately and amazingly enough, I still never understand this, but the name "What's Your Issue?", as far as I can tell, has not been taken by another podcast. So it was available. It was a moniker that I used on a comic book review show that we tried to get started a couple of years ago on Geeks Worldwide, and it's still not in use. So we are co-opting it for the purposes of our podcast here. Again, my co-host in crime, Steven. How you doing, Steven? Good week so far?
Yeah, it's a good week. It was a great week.
Good.
I had a good time on a rock concert last Friday.
Oh, nice. Yeah. I see Maroon 5 has been traveling around and doing concerts.
Oh, I went to a Fozzy concert.
Okay. Very cool.
Big fun in Florida. Yeah.
Very cool. So, as always, on each and every episode of What's Your Issue, we run down roughly about 6 comic book reviews in our review discussion segment. Then we will each talk about the best thing that we read this week, or the best thing I read this week, as well as our honorable mentions. And then as we walk you out the door, we will brief you up on what we are going to be reading next week, so you know what to expect. First up in the rundown in the review segment is me, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the Silencer issue number 9. This is Holiday Road Part 2. Again, this is, of course, published by DC. Art by Patch Zurcher. The writers Dan Abnett. Colors by Mike Spicer. Letters by Tom Napolitano. Cover art by Victor Bogdanovich, Jonathan Glapion, and FCO Placencia. I mentioned the cover artist this time around because I didn't really particularly care for this cover. It's a little kind of weird and too Halloween-y and cartoonish for what is actually a pretty serious comic book on the inside. So it was a little too over the top for me. Minor issue. And Steven, I wanted to ask you, have you noticed, and maybe this is just an Abnett thing, is there a thing going on in comics right now where there is a trend? So for the last couple decades, we have historically put the writer's name first in the credits. Is there a shift underway? Are we starting to see the artist's name first more so?
I don't know. The artist name was there first?
Yeah, so Patch Zurcher, and the same was the case.
Notice.
So you and I both read, I think...
Silencer. Yeah, I did read it. I just didn't look at what the order the writer and artist was in.
Right, and then, well, what I was going to say was, you and I both read the last, Suicide Squad, right? We read a couple of issues, or maybe all of the issues of the Suicide Squad Aquaman crossover, and the same was true on at least the Aquaman issue. The artist's name was first and Abnett's name was second.
Yeah, I noticed I didn't know. I didn't really look at it.
Yeah, so I don't know if
the artist's name first and then the writer.
Right.
It's kind of weird.
So I don't know if that's a thing that's going on or what, but it just struck me as funny. At any rate, this issue again is good. The series is wonderfully consistent, I think, is the main thing I would say. So the situation here is the Silencer is an assassin who was formerly in the employ of Talia al Ghul, whose rival organization to her father's League of Shadows, or whatever is in the books now. I lose track on whether or not it's League of Shadows or League of Assassins, whatever. Talia's group is named Leviathan. That group has descended into civil war in the wake of Talia's death. So Silencer's family, her husband, and I think it's her stepson, are visiting a nearby amusement park. And so in the last issue, Silencer slipped across the border to investigate 2 of the warring factions engaged in the civil war for control of Leviathan. And at the end, she was caught in a spell by one of the faction leaders, Wishbone, who is a magician who most of the other faction leaders in Leviathan kind of made fun of and kind of didn't really pay attention to, but she is turning out to be the key threat in these culminating throes of the Civil War. Wishbone, who's the only one who's remained loyal to Talia and is trying to resurrect her in a Lazarus pit, and the spell switched bodies between her and one of the other faction leaders, Quietus. So Quietus, who arguably is more powerful, at least toe-to-toe, in a toe-to-toe fight, decides that instead of focusing on how to switch back, he's going to use this chance to find out everything he can about Silencer and her personal life, because Silencer has been able to pretty much keep it on the DL that she is married and has a child. So in this issue, we open up with Silencer in Quietus's body, intercepting Quietus in Silencer's body in an effort to stop her. So on art, really solid fight choreography was my main takeaway. The vehicles could use some work. This is a thing that tends to happen in comic book art because people don't draw vehicles a lot, and not all of them do it well and practice it as a key part of their craft. So you get these kind of curved lines on like the roofs of cars, when normally the roof of the car, from that angle at least, would be kind of straight. So the vehicles could use some work, so the cars kind of wind up looking a little bit cartoony. I mentioned this because there's a big car chase as a significant part of the opening sequences of the book. But, this is a pretty complex fight, because you have Quietus, who's got all sorts of attachments, kind of cyborg-like, popping off of him all over the place. So I give props to Zurcher for keeping all that straight. And I'm not familiar with his work in the past. One thing that doesn't work here on art, though, is the lettering. They made a choice to try and do colored borders around the thoughts of characters to represent exposition from a particular character, so each character's letterbox is colored differently. But I definitely lost track on it, and it got confusing as to whose thoughts I was supposed to be reading. And I was like, look, I know the comic book industry suddenly had this like religious schism a few years ago where they decided to stop doing thought bubbles, but I'm like, you guys need to just do thought bubbles. When it's appropriate, just do thought bubbles. So the creature work here, I wasn't too crazy about. There's a point where Wishbone sends her cat to the scene of the fight and transforms it into a big hulking. I call it a splotch, for lack of a better term. I didn't know what to call it. It's not a cat, but it's the cat. But I will say, one of the things that's really neat here on art is there's the color and lighting make it feel like it's late afternoon, and so that carries throughout the book consistently, and I was very impressed by that. So you get kind of this effect of the waning sun casting its last rays of yellow and low on the horizon. The effect is subtle, but it definitely comes through despite all the debris and explosives being thrown around. On story, the story comes off okay. And like I said, I asked the question about like the weirdness of the credits, but there's a lot of intricacy in the story. This book is very Deathstroke-like. If you or any of the listeners have read that, it's a big spy story. Essentially, there's a lot of intrigue, a lot of chicanery, a lot of whodunit, a lot of back and forth, and a lot of misdirection. But Abnett does a good job of keeping it together because that's one of the things that he does. It can easily lead to a confusing landscape, but I've been able to keep up with it, despite the fact that I've arrived late to the party. And this book is not on my recurring pull list. Just by weird happenstance, for whatever reason, in various throws of the die, I've wound up pulling it the last, I think, 2 issues plus the annual. So the truth of the matter is but one thing to be said is that one of the reasons I keep up is because I load shed some of the intricate detail, because I feel like it just doesn't matter. Like, you just care about Silencer, all the Leviathan and the different factions, and because you have people who show up who are leaders of a faction in Leviathan who could currently get killed in the same issue. So it's like, why would I bother to ever care about keeping up with like who that person's name is or what faction they represent if they're just going to get killed off? So mainly I stick with it because I'm curious about where this book is heading, along with some other things that exist somewhere between DC proper and Wildstorm. Like, it's not what they're letting Ellis do with Wildstorm, but it's also not fully in the DC proper. So you've got this, you've got Damage, you've got Immortal Men. The whole thing is just curious and interesting and fun. DC isn't doing anything else like this as far as those 3 books are concerned, in terms of playing with kind of these semi-permeable fabrics of a shared universe, and neither is Marvel. At the end of the day, I give this book 7 out of 10. Sharply and boldly executed. There's a scene, like I said, where one of the Leviathan faction leads gets brutally eaten by a giant monster cat, and that's straight up Abnett, right? Some weird, funky stuff there. The book's not doing anything mind-blowing, but at the end of the day, the issues are consistent from month to month, and that's just kind of some of the sinew you need to put together a solid run. So did you read this issue, Stephen?
Yeah, I read this issue. I actually liked it a lot.
Okay.
I thought the action was very well done. Like it was really cool seeing the Silencer fight Quietus.
Right, right.
I know they were switched, their bodies were switched, and it was confusing to read the voices because I would sometimes read Quietus as Silencer and then end up reading Silencer as Quietus because
Well, right.
it got
That's my thing
confusing.
about the shaded letterboxes, right? Compounding the problem is the fact that their bodies are switched. So you're like, who's this? What? So yeah, it was just a little. I was like, please just use thought bubbles.
I still very much enjoy the issue, and
Yeah,
I think Silencer is actually my best. Is honestly the best series for out of all the Dark Knight's Metal spin-offs.
right.
I think Silencer is the best one.
Cool, cool.
The other ones were pretty. They're okay.
Right, right. So I'm going to roll on and talk about Black Panther, and this one I was not as enamored with. So this chapter is the Intergalactic Empire of Wakanda, Book 1, Many Thousands Gone. Of course, published by Marvel. And I forget how to pronounce Coates' name. I've heard it several times on other podcasts, but Ta-Nehisi Coates is the writer, and Daniel Acuna is the artist, who's a name I'm familiar with, but I don't know that I've ever like taken more than like a few minutes to look at his work and really think about it. So my main takeaway from this book is I don't want this, right? I don't know why they're doing this. I don't know what this is within the Marvel Universe. I don't get it. You just had the movie, which blew the doors off of everything. Black Panther zeitgeist is at an apogee right now. I don't understand why you don't do a book that firmly grounds that character in the Marvel Universe and has them play a part and be hugely relevant. I would think that that's how you would get a lot of subscribers and readers. So anyway, so I don't know if this is like I don't know if somebody's unconscious and dreaming about the future, or somebody has time traveled, or this is just kind of like a what if kind of story. But at any rate, so 2,000 years in the future, Wakanda goes through some extraplanetary something or other and takes over some corner of the cosmos. Some of the characters are supposed to be new, but then you still have T'Challa and M'Baku. And it looks like M'Baku is the Black Panther now, which I don't entirely understand. You have relationships going on and people in love with different people, but I don't understand. Like I don't understand where they came from or who they are now or why. Like I don't understand how these people lived for 2,000 years. I don't get it. So I don't know if the whole series. And, this is a relatively new Black Panther series. It just rebooted. It's only on issue 4. I don't know if they rebooted the whole timeline or what. But to me, it just came off as a colossal WTF moment.
I agree.
Somebody at Marvel definitely took the blue pill on this one. On art, perhaps the biggest shame in all of this is that the art is actually pretty good. It's a bit impressionist and progressive, and it works okay, but it feels a little bit extra. It feels like it's an unnecessarily artsy veneer on a story. I mean, if you're going to go cosmic and you're going to make it an adventure romp, then maybe it doesn't need to be quite so artsy. It comes off a little like Saga, and some other sci-fi stuff I've seen. And tonally it didn't click for me. It looks like a lot of rubbings in some areas with the flat side of the pencil. Some of it, it's not all colored, which was fine. Like I said, it might have come off as edgy otherwise, but it kind of wavers. It feels like trying to be a little Esad Ribic or Mike Del Mundo, but I didn't quite feel like it held together. But the big problem is that the storytelling I just felt was kind of not great. Pretty awful is what I actually wrote in my notes. There's just big leaps of, like, there are fight scenes, and you can't tell if characters are grabbing, like, a futuristic laser gun or what's coming out of them. There's just purple and blue blobs everywhere. I think the big problem I had, and the thing that really turned me off to the book, is there's, like, a main villain in a suit of armor. He shows up and throws this kind of orangish light thing at T'Challa. T'Challa catches it, and T'Challa turns it into a spear with a purple hue. He throws it
out of nowhere.
He throws it back at the guy, and when it hits him, it looks like it's just a purple light beam.
To me, that was like plot convenience.
Right, and then the camera snaps back to T'Challa, and he's still holding something in his hand, and now it's orange again. And I'm like, what in the heck just happened? And then the other thing is, so it looks to me like T'Challa spears the guy with some mystical purple spear, and it looks like he's down for the count. But in the 3 panels after, all of the Wakandan characters act in fear, and I'm like, he just put the big bad. Excuse me, I'm like,
Your voice.
yeah, I'm like, he just put down the big bad. What are you 3 all flipping out for? Well, it turns out that the guy wasn't taken down, that he's back on his feet, but you don't see that for like 5 panels later. So it's just, man, it just feels bad. T'Challa looks at this guy with some type of X-ray vision and scans him, and the guy looks young. And at first, I thought it was what is the villain's name in the movie again?
Eric Killmonger. Yeah,
Killmonger.
I think it's him.
Yeah, it looks like Killmonger, but then like at the end of the book, like you don't see like it. And then at the end of the book, there's like a second Black Panther who's apparently with the bad guys. I just really fell off of this. On story, a lot of this is covered in my comments on the art because the storytelling is so intertwined and bad. You know, I think this is the first thing I've read from Coates directly. I was hoping for something different. You know, like I said, M'Baku appears on the cover, but the inside of the book seems to mostly be about T'Challa. So I'm unclear exactly what we're doing here. The upfront exposition didn't help, especially because they call out the fact that like a new hero arrived in the midst of this civil war. But you never really see in the book who that new hero was. Are they talking about T'Challa? Are they talking about M'Baku? I don't know. There are rebels in the story, I guess, or maybe they're just the Spec Ops version of the rebels. They call them the Maroons, and I'm like, that sounds awfully a lot like morons, and that's how I said it every time I read it, and I'm like, I don't think you can pull off calling them Maroons in a book like this. I mean, I think if this were Charles Soule writing it, he could do that in a way that would get away with it. I felt like Abnett could get away with it. The style in which this book is written, it doesn't. It's like every time I see it on the page, I want to say the morons. At any rate, I scored this book a 5.5 out of 10. I'm just not interested in it. There's a weird thing here for some of my normal shticks and approaches. Normally, on a random drop-in book, I will usually give it 2 chances before I go, okay, if it pops up again on my randomizer, I'm not reading it. I think I'm at that point with this one already. So I don't know if this is like a 4-issue what-if segue. But I mean, the book is professionally done. It's not like some of the stuff we saw in Marvel 2 or 3 years ago where they had artists who just weren't really professional grade artists doing some books. It's not that, but it just feels really disconnected and unglued. So did you read through this or flip through it?
Yeah, I read it. I just didn't know what to think of it because it's like, is Black Panther in a coma or trapped in some type of alternate world? Because I was thinking it was like maybe it's like Captain America with Rick Remender, where
Right.
Armin Zola trapped Captain America in this alternate world, and he was trying to escape, and he met some couple of people in there, and he eventually did escape. But I'm not sure if Black Panther is going through the same thing. It's just like some alternate future of Wakanda.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's like, and I'm trying to understand what the hell the story is going on because it's not it's not like the stories in continuity. It's just it's just a deep dive into its own world, and it feels like this is an alternate world book, not like a book that takes place 616.
Right.
I don't know.
Right. And let me just point out. So, I am not somebody who gives a book a bad score in my own menagerie because I don't agree with the creative direction it's going in. Right. So, I don't automatically dismiss a book because it's not in continuity or it's not part of the larger universe, I like continuity. I like big universes. But when you take it in a creative direction that I don't like, and it's not done well, then it's kind of double indemnity, right? Then I mean, again, this is why for me this book dips down below. Pretty much for me a 6.0 or above is like a book that's hitting the mark, right? It's and then you get
Yeah.
higher breakouts for things that are special. But this book, like I could have probably
There's
given it a lower score.
there's not even much dialogue. I don't know what the
Oh, it's
characters rarely talk. It's just
well,
action going on everywhere.
yeah, and the dialogue that is very stilted and like one linerish and like not
Yeah.
interconnecting. Now the other thing that I think was problematic for me creatively in this book is you get a lot of silent panels, and you get a lot of silent panels with confusing fight choreography and things that don't tell a good story. Listeners, I want you to hold on to that thought because later we're going to talk about a book that damn like this is literally the best silent panels that I've seen in a book since Warren Ellis did his run on Moon Knight. But we will get to that later. Steven, please wash the bad taste of Black Panther out of my mouth
Okay.
by talking to me
I
about Star
will.
Wars Poe Dameron.
Star Wars Poe Dameron was actually pretty good. I really did like this issue. It was by Charles. The writer was Charles Soule, and the artist was Angel Uzia. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but it was very well done. It was a final issue of the series, and there was a story where the Princess, I mean General Leia, she sends the Black Squadron. This is like this story took place before and during and after the Last Jedi. So she sends the Black Squadron on this mission to trade some natural resources with another planet. This thing Kuraku, something like that. I don't know how to pronounce it, but they do some trading, and then as the trading that's going on, they have the first order invades the planet, and they have a war. So the Black Squadron's team has to actually fight them off. And Poe Dameron is in he's in the interactions with whatever is going on in Last Jedi, so he's not with the team. So they had to fight off the First Order by themselves without Poe Dameron, and they do fight them off, but they run into some trouble, and then the story ends up shifting to the last taking place in the last like after the Last Jedi. And Poe Dameron's talking to Leia. They say he has to go save his team because he feel like his team is going through something and they haven't come back after a while. So he's gonna go try to go save them. He ends up going over there and they end up fighting. He ends up saving them and they fight off the last soldiers. That's from the First Order that invaded the planet, and they able to get their resources, and that was the end of the story. But I really did enjoy this issue because you get to see the soldiers, I mean the people from Black Squadron able to fight off the soldiers, and they didn't care about risking their lives. One of the soldiers, I think she was like some type of vampire, like some she got shot in the chest, but she was able to walk it off and still fought the enemies. So enemies from the First Order, she was able to fight them off, and it was pretty good. I really much enjoyed it, and I think I'll honestly give this issue a 9 out of 10 because it was pretty cool to see the characters care more about the people of the planet than themselves, and that's pretty touching to see people who fight in the resistance think that way. So yeah, and the art was pretty well done as well.
Very cool. Now, are you reading any of the other Star Wars books, Vader, Doctor Aphra, or the main Star Wars book?
Yeah, I am reading those two books as well.
Okay.
Yeah,
I mean, out of those, does this one compare well, or do you like this one better, or how
I
do you think
like
it
it the
starts?
same as Doctor Afra.
Okay.
I like those. Darth Vader is okay. It's not as good as Carry On Gillen's Darth Vader because I did read Killian Gillen's Darth Vader, and is Charles Soule's is kind of is weaker. The writer is kind of weaker than Kieran Gillen's.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it seems like to me Charles Soule writes Darth Vader as like an action book, and
Okay.
not really into action books. And Kieran Gillen wrote it as a more of a story, and I'm more into story than action.
Huh. Yeah. No, that's an interesting take. So Doomsday Clock number 7 by DC. This is one of these things that's going on that I feel like somebody is trying to wave their hands in the corner and say is an important thing that I should pay attention to, but I'm
I'm
not.
actually enjoying it.
But I'm not paying attention to it. So tell me if I'm doing something wrong here.
Well, I don't know. I'm joining a lot. It was Doomsday Clock by Doomsday Clock number 7 by Jeff Johns, and the artist is Gary Frank. And it was really well done. I actually enjoyed this issue. There was like some interesting plot twists with the new Rorschach's origin, that you find out that Amadeus actually planned his parents' death in order for him to come with him to the DC universe and find Dr. Manhattan. And they do gather a whole bunch of DC characters like Thunderbolts and Saturn Girl, and they end up finding Dr. Manhattan, and he did talk to him for a while, and he talks about how he got there, but he doesn't explain the full story, so he ends up leaving. So I just think the twist with finding out the new Rorschach's origin is pretty interesting, because they did explain his origin in the 4th issue, and we find out that the origin is not his actual origin. It was something else in the 7th issue. So I'll give this an 8 out of 10. It was pretty fun. Oh, your mute is my.
Yeah, no, sorry. Yeah, I've got a software mute and a hardware mute, and yeah, if you ever talk to the guys on the games podcast, they will affirm that I frequently flummox myself when it's multi-tiered controls. So, any particular additional notes on art or story, things that you like,
Oh,
things
I
that you didn't like?
forgot that. I also find out one of the two like jokester characters is from the Watchmen universe. Osmond Diaz tells them that one of them is that she's pregnant, and I thought that was interesting, and see what that will lead. I wonder what that lead up to.
Right, right. So now, is this firmly in DC continuity, or is this another thing that's kind of like?
I don't know if it's confusing, because I don't know. It hasn't said where it takes place, but I'm getting the feeling it takes place in Flashpoint, because
Okay, huh.
Batman is wearing his Batman Incorporated outfit, and Superman is in his underwear outfit. So
Right. Although, well, but
it's kind of weird.
yeah, but new super. Yeah, that's weird because new Superman. Well, it gets weird
I know
now, right?
Superman is wearing the underwear now.
Right. But you're right. It creates that thing where like you don't know, because the new 52 was now a thing in the middle. So when you see like the older costumes, you're like, and Batman Incorporated suit should have been new 52, right?
No, it was before New 52.
Okay.
It was there was a Batman Incorporated book in the New 52.
Right.
There was Batman Incorporated before New 52 as well. So it gets confusing.
All right, man. So
he was wearing a different suit in the New 52.
Right.
Than the one before New 52.
I don't know. Yeah, I was. I mean, we're going to talk a little bit about. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about Justice League Odyssey right after this, actually. And one of the things, and I saw, comments on Twitter with some people chanting for a DC reboot, and then somebody in the industry refuting that call. And then I read Justice League Odyssey #1, and I was like, are they coiling us up for a reboot? Because this has a flavor as if they're going to flip the status quo pretty significantly in what could result in a reboot. But then I looked, and I was thinking, and because actually I wrote in my review notes for Justice League Odyssey, I was like, yeah, maybe it's just about time, and maybe DC is just going into this thing where we're just going to reboot every 4 years, which I can actually see as being a thing that could actually be effective. I didn't realize Rebirth was just 2 years ago. Rebirth was just 2016. So we're only 2 years into this. Yeah, but it seems like between between Flashpoint, New 52, and Rebirth, we've just traveled a very long road. So I was shocked and amazed, kind of really, to realize how short a time it's been. And I want to say Rebirth started like the latter half of 2016 too. So it's literally been like 2 calendar years. So at any rate, talk to me about Extermination #3. Is this an X-Men book?
Well, I think it's about just the Odyssey, or
What's that?
I think it's about more about just the Odyssey. Sorry. Yeah, it's an X-Men book, Extermination.
Are you?
Oh,
You want me to talk about Odyssey first, and then you talk about Extermination?
no, I thought you was. I got confused. For
No,
a second.
sorry.
I got it. It's Extermination is actually it's an X-Men book. It's supposed to I think it's supposed to lead in the young X-Men, like the original young X-Men, into they're gonna is I think it's a story that leads into them going back into the past.
Right, or just takes them off the board completely.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, this is a mini series that's gonna take them off the map. And that's in that series, the X-Men are being hunted by some young Cable. Like there's a younger version of Cable, and he's gathering all the younger X-Men. And in this issue, he got Beast. In this issue, he already had gotten Angel and Iceman the previous 2 issues, and now he's just gotten Beast. And all the X-Men are trying to help the younger X-Men fight off. And Jean Grey is with the X-Force because Cable ends up getting killed in the first issue, the original Cable. And apparently the original X-Force wants revenge. They want to find a way to kill the younger Cable. And as that's going on, there's also a villain I don't know that was in Days of Future Past, I think. His name is Ahava, something like that. And he's also involved in the battle. And people thought that young Cable was working with him, but you end up finding out in this issue they were not working together. It's 2 separate affiliations, I guess. Yeah, so it was pretty interesting to see how Jean Grey and the younger Jean Grey ends up working with the original X-Force, and how they actually, at first she didn't agree with them to kill younger Cable, but then they end up convincing her to let's go kill him, because they killed someone they cared about, and someone they talk about how Cable is actually their mentor and told them how to do things differently than the X-Men doesn't operate. Like they don't kill people. That's how the X-Men operate, and the X-Force does it. They actually kill people. So it was interesting to see the discussion going on with Jean Grey and the X-Force.
Okay, very cool. How do you feel? So are you?
And I would give it like a 7, a 8. Actually, I'd give it an 8. Yeah.
Okay.
Out of 10.
So now, are you a regular reader of like the X-Men books?
Yes, I actually enjoyed X-Men a lot.
Okay.
I got to X-Men since the X-Men animated series and X-Men Evolution, and when my first combo was House of M, so
Okay.
I'm really into the X-Men a lot.
Yeah. So how do you feel? So I was into the X-Men notionally in the 80s. I was a big New Mutants fan, probably more than anything. I was there for when Magique discovered her armor that she could make appear, and as she learned to slip across into the demon dimension and all that stuff. But I also saw it go off the rails, and I can't remember if it was a thing that Chris Claremont started on his way out, or if it happened after his exit from the X-Men. But with the time travel silliness, So my question is, I have felt like this most recent rendition before the extermination stuff started with X-Men Blue and X-Men Gold, I have felt like this is the most orderly variant of like the X-Men editorial desk that I've seen in decades. Because I felt like ever since like the late 80s, early 90s when the time travel stuff started, X-Men has kind of been a jumbled mess. How do you feel Extermination is doing, trying to tie those things up and prepping to reset the status quo and get all these books marching kind of in the same direction?
I think it's doing a pretty good job on because it does show X-Men Red and X-Men Gold in the book as well, and it doesn't really interfere with what's going on in their own books. This is its own separate story that takes place. I think this book takes place after X-Men Blue. I'm not sure because X-Men Blue already ended, and they were still in the present time. It's not like it didn't end with them going to the past or anything. So I'm thinking the story takes place after both X-Men Gold and Blue.
Okay. All right. Cool.
Yeah, I think it's doing pretty good. The
All right.
action was really fun. I enjoyed the book. It was good.
Good deal, man. All right, well, I'm going to wrap up the review segment here by talking about Justice League Odyssey #1. So I saw a lot of buzz on Twitter that people really enjoyed this book. I'm not sure if I saw like more buzz than is really warranted, if I just saw the vocal minority. Subtitle of this book is Ghost Sector Part 1, obviously published by DC. Writer Joshua Williamson, who I am familiar with from his run on The Flash. Artist Stepan Secik, who I am not familiar with, and letters by Darren Bennett. Now, one of the things to discuss in this book, because I don't keep up with like solicits and all the insider news and whatnot, I don't know. It seems like this book is an ongoing, right? Because normally, if it were a miniseries or a limited, it wouldn't be subtitled. It wouldn't be subtitled Part 1. Like, there would be no arc in a miniseries because the miniseries would only be like 4 to 6 books. The miniseries would be the arc. So it struck me as strange, and I'll get into why, that this was subtitled as a Part 1. So I didn't know, this book probably represents the one that I struggled with the most this week in terms of like where I was going to come down on it from a review score perspective, but also just from a feeling perspective of whether I enjoyed it or not. Like I actually wrapped up the book and kind of walked away from it not knowing how I felt. Now one of my sticks that I'll explain is I do a thing where I force myself to score a book as soon as I get done reading it. I do not let myself walk away and marinate on it because I feel like often that sometimes will skew a score more positive or negative than is really warranted. I will say and admit that this is a book that if I had walked away from it and thought about it and come back to it, I probably would have scored higher than I did. Because as I thought about it more, I think I realized that I maybe liked it a little more than I felt initially when I put it down. So with everything else this week, like I knew I kind of liked Silencer, I knew I didn't like Black Panther, and so on. This one I had a tough time. I went back and forth on the art, I went back and forth on how I felt about the reveal at the end. But when all was said and done, and blad nabbit, I completely forgot. I'm going to need to put it in the thing. This is a spoiler show, so as you know by now that we've been at it for 30 minutes, we are going to talk about the books. So I guess you know that I'll do a better job of trying to put that. I had it in the agenda, and I completely blew through it. At any rate, when it was all said and done, I came down on the side of for what the story is trying to do with 4 of the younger heroes who have been around for a long time in the DC universe, but DC still casts as more youthful than Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman. I hope this is not going to tread too heavily on what Marvel is doing with Champions, because in some ways it feels like they're kind of coiling up to do the same thing, and I know and I get that the big two often parrot each other thematically, but I don't like it. Like I said, I'm familiar with Williamson from his run on The Flash, which I think I was an overall fan of, even though Flash never wound up in my recurring pull list. Sedgis is entirely new to me, so let's talk a little bit more about the book. So the situation here is, so we have a lot of call-outs to things that have been going on in the Justice League and its associated event books. There's call-outs to Metal. There are references to things you would know about if you've been reading the new League book that Snyder kicked off. Indications seem to be that this is an ongoing, as I mentioned, given the subtitling. but then it seems very weird that you would shard these particular 4 characters off on their own in an ongoing book. So I'm not clear on how they're going to be operating separately, but then still be in continuity on the regular book. Maybe this is going to be like a Batman Eternal deal, where it's like a thing but not quite a thing. Anyway, you get Azrael, and then the really neat thing about this book, and I guess one of the reasons I started to kind of fall in love with it, is you put Cyborg back together with Starfire. They were together for decades in the Teen Titans and Titans, and then they were separated and pointing in different directions. Cyborg, in multiple reboots, suddenly became a founding member of the Justice League, which I guess I have a thing for that I don't like about that. And Starfire at one point went off and became one of the Outlaws in Red Hood and the Outlaws. So it was wonderful to see them back together and to see them written as if they have this deep relationship from having adventured and fought together before. And I also love that you get Green Lantern Jessica Cruz, who's one of my favorites because I've been with her for so long. I jumped on the Green Lanterns reboot when it rebooted with Rebirth with Baz and Jessica Cruz together. Now those two are being separated and are off in different parts of the galaxy doing their own thing. But anyway, you have these 4 who are put together in a space trekking vision quest, and by various misadventures and happenstance, they end up in this region of space that's been forbidden from entry by the Guardians of the Universe, and has only been allowed to be patrolled by Cruz for some reason. On art, again, things here were weird for me. Cedric seems to float right on the fence of being too cartoony, versus tipping over to be kind of along the Esad Ribic route. The art feels a bit kind of like Fiona Staples on Saga, and it's kind of heavy metalish in terms of the face. Faces are very big and prominent. He does a lot of close-up camera work. And each face, what I applaud is each face is definitely shaped differently. You know, you have a lot of artists who kind of draw the same kind of basic oval shape of the face and then detail it. But all of his faces are different. Like the cut of the cheek is different. Like some people have slender chins, some people have wider chins. I really like Cruz's new costume design. So again, part of the thing that bugged me about the art was it didn't seem to stick the landing. Stylistically, and I didn't like it. It felt kind of like this like manga light, and I really didn't like the panels that looked like that. Still, overall, I felt pretty good about it. Like I said, I didn't kind of like the cartooniness, but overall, and so one of the things is the cartooniness distracts from the incredible level of detail that I'm forgetting how to pronounce his name, that Cedric puts into the books. He's got Brainiac's ship in it, incredibly detailed. He's got somebody put
there's inconsistency details in that book.
Yeah. Like, and what finally got me to kind of tip over as I was flipping back through it is one of the opening pages is a landscape splash page of like all of the seemingly infinite planets in the Ghost sector. Kind of reminding me of that scene in Return of the Jedi where like all the rebel ships are coming up out of the screen and all the Imperial TIE fighters are flying towards them, and like I think we talked about this last episode, but you have like 80 starships on screen or whatever. But it's all pretty amazing. Some weird artistic choices, like I don't get steampunk Darkseid, like Darkseid in like the frock with a hoodie, but it's a choice, so fine. You know, I will admit, if it were craggy stone Darkseid, I don't think it would come off. This notion that he is somehow benevolently trying to help guide these 4 younger heroes to usher in this new era of the old gods. I don't think I would buy that if he was kind of craggy monster-looking Darkseid. So I guess artistically that's a thing. On story, like I said, kind of talked about it a little bit in the overall setup. But again, we get the reveal, so I kind of mentioned it already. At the end of the book, you find out. So they talk through the book about how there were these voices in their head. Azrael has always had a voice in his head. He mentions that that the new voice he's hearing is somehow different. And then Starfire and Cyborg also mentioned that they've had a voice speaking to them also. That's what eventually got them all headed towards the Ghost sector. So you find out at the end of the book that the voice that's been talking to them is Darkseid. But the other big reveal you get, and possibly the more remarkable one, is that this notion of the old gods, you know, throughout the book they talk about these planets and them having these old religions and worshiping the old gods. it turns out that the old gods are Azrael, Cyborg, and Starfire, which I was like, wow. Now the only thing that cuts me a little wrongly is that we kind of just did this at the end of New 52 with the Justice League, where they met basically what was kind of DC's version of the Eternals or the Celestials, and the various members of the Justice League absorbed those powers and became godlike for like a few issue run. So we kind of did this a little bit, but I think they're going to do. I'm pretty confident that that Williamson is doing something completely different here. At the end of the day, I scored this an 8.0 out of 10. Again, it was the third book that I read this week. It was my follow-up to the bad taste that Black Panther left in my mouth. Like I said, if I didn't have my thing about scoring it the way that I score it, I probably would have scored it higher. This is kind of... what I like about this book is it's a great, like, 20-somethings story, because all these characters in the book, regardless of how long they've been around, are kind of portrayed to be, like, in their early to mid-20s. So I kind of like that. And then you put Darkseid in it, and which just gives you kind of a God only knows factor. You just don't know what that guy's going to do and what he is going to try and pull off. So overall, I like it. It feels a bit like the there was a thing DC did last year, I think, like about the Amazons, and I can't remember what it was called. I read a bunch of it though, and this feels kind of the same way. So I'm very curious and interested to see what goes on there. Overall, just good stuff going on from the Justice League desk at DC. Steven, you mentioned, so you flipped through this one as well. Any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I've read Justice League Odyssey. It was a lot to take in because it was like a lot of interesting things that were brand new in this book, and it was pretty interesting to see Starfire and Cyborg talking to each other. I don't know, but it felt like it was kind of flirtatious. Like, there's like, I don't know if there's gonna be a relationship between Cyborg and Starfire.
Yeah,
but it looked like they were talking very flirty.
Yeah, it feels like they edged towards that and then kind of walked back from it. At the end of the day, it came off like a little bit kind of like the Will Riker, Deanna Troi relationship before. You know, when they had dated, but then they weren't dating, and they were really good friends, or like the Beverly Crusher Picard kind of relationship. It felt kind of like that. That there's a closeness and an intimacy there, but it's not physical.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I really appreciated what they did with the book.
Yeah, and they like seeing Azrael and Jessica Cruz in the book.
Yeah.
And it was a pretty interesting plot. I want to see why Darkseid wants to. I'm not sure. Are they really the old gods? It's kind of weird that supposedly Cyborg, Azrael, and Starfire are supposed to be the old gods.
Well,
years before they were even born.
Well, and that's I mean, like thousands of years. But again, this is kind of what I like it. Like you would think in a DC book, if there were a bunch of people sitting in a lost sector of the universe who were worshiping old gods, and those gods had been reincarnated, which is kind of how I'm reading that they're reincarnations of those gods.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
You would naturally lean towards, oh, well, certainly it's Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, and like you pick like one, like Martian Manhunter, right? So the fact that it's Cyborg, Starfire, and Azrael like is just completely out of left field for those three characters, but makes it so, and that one of them is Azrael also makes it very interesting. But I keep saying I hope this isn't what they're doing, what Marvel's doing with Champions, but in some ways I hope that is. Like what I like about Champions is it is establishing a foundation to have a changing of the guard, right? To have new heroes in the Marvel universe come to prominence, and I kind of like the thought of like Cyborg not being a junior member of the Justice League at some point, but leading the Justice League at some point, and having this additional cast of younger heroes, you know, behind him or with him. So let's go ahead and talk about the best thing that we each read this week. For me, and I tweeted this out and got some thank yous and some responses from Chip Zdarsky. For me, it was Peter Parker's Spectacular Spider-Man number 310. This is Zdarsky's farewell issue for Spectacular Spider-Man. The last few issues with the Sandman story were incredible. Like I have been, eyes filled with tears. The last two episodes reading the Sandman story, and this story which is about basically, Peter Parker, in classic Spider-Man fashion, intercepts crooks escaping from a robbery. Uh, Two of the crooks, he snabs and turns over to the cops. He chases down the third one, and the third one's like a 13-year-old kid, or 15-year-old kid. Spider-Man then builds a relationship with the kid, starts getting him back on the right path. But when the other two crooks get out from jail, I assume on bail, they believe that because the third kid didn't get nipped by the cops, that he must have sold them out, and they kill him. It happens off screen; you don't see it. The other setup for this issue is that there's a guy who's a film student who's going around interviewing people and getting New Yorkers' feelings about Spider-Man. And one of the people interviewed is the mother of this kid, and you see her breakdown during the interview. You see some flashback scenes, and all these things are done in silent panels. And this is again, this is the issue that I was talking about when I say this is how you do silent panels. And you progress. You see Spider-Man come to the kid's apartment, look for him. He's not there. He comes. He was swinging in through the window. He comes down and rings the doorbell. The mother doesn't answer. He starts to walk away. The mother comes out of the door. The two of them look at each other. They don't say anything, and she just kind of collapses in his arms. And he understands what's. Excuse me, getting a little emotional again. He understands what has transpired, and then you get like these 4 or 5 panels with Peter on a rooftop, taking off his mask, and just crying. And like these are the Spider-Man stories I want told. I appreciate what the movies are doing. I understand that they need to do it, but I'm over teenage Peter Parker and the whole shtick of him trying to pay his rent. Right? It's been going on for decades. I don't need it. Stories like this that talk about how Peter Parker is ingrained with like New Yorkers and New York and is part of the landscape and is emotionally intertwined. Like those are the stories that need to be that Spider-Man needs to be used for. He's a more mature character. You can tell more emotional stories with him, and I feel like that's the thing that needs to be done. It's an amazing capstone to Zdarsky's run. I feel like his time on Spectacular is a thing. I tried to say it a little differently in the tweets to him because I didn't want to like tip him over or say it the wrong way. I feel this is the work that he's done that is the most interesting to me. I've never been interested in like the Howard the Duck stuff and the comedic stuff and the kind of the off-kilter weird humor stuff, but damn, like what he did with this, and it's not just a breakout for him, but it's a seminal breakout for Spider-Man as a character. It's an amazing book. I think I'm going to have to look it up while I let you talk about yours. I think I scored this a 9.5, and like I can count on 2 hands the number of comics that I've ever scored, even given 9s to. I've never scored. I've only ever scored one book at 10, but this is a 9.5. I was just amazed. In the wake of the Miles Morales thing in Champions, there's just some great Spider-Man work going on. In places other than the main book, and I like Nick Spencer. He does a thing, and he does a thing with his humor. But to me, in a thing that's, in the Marvel universe, the most thing akin to the Bat family. I've been super impressed by what's going on, particularly in Spectacular Spider-Man. But I understand there's good work going on elsewhere in Spider-Man stories, which I think you're going to talk to us a little bit about now, Stephen.
Oh, I was going to talk a little bit about Spectacular Spider-Man.
Yeah, go ahead.
I actually really enjoyed that issue a lot too, and I was considering it to be the best of the week, but I saw you actually put it in there, and as soon as I saw that the kid ended up getting killed off, I actually dropped the book and started a little bit crying a little bit because that was a little bit heartbreaking. Actually seeing that the kid was actually trying to be a better person, and Spider-Man actually helped him through it, and the criminal ends up killing the kid off. So it's like it was very well done. I really like the way Chip Zdarsky actually told this story, and I honestly did like it a lot. Yeah. So I'm gonna talk about the and it was a nice send off because that's his last issue for the series. So I'm glad that he actually wrote a good issue the last times to write that book. The the book that I thought was the best of the week was it was Edge of Spider Geddon. It was it was it was written and drawn by Carter, and this story is like it's a whole bunch. Is a book that is this mini series that introduces a whole bunch of spider characters that's gonna be in the event of Spider Geddon. Like this is like a part two of Spider Verse. So in this story, you find out you see it opens up with Harry Osborn getting a letter from Peter Parker saying that if you read this letter, I might you now know that I'm actually dead, that I'm no longer here. And the letter opens up, yes. So Harry Osborn finds out that Peter Parker has died. And in the letter, he also finds out that it was Norman Osborn, his father, that put Peter Parker in some Spider-Man experiment. And as he put him in the Spider-Man experiment, he ends up dying. So Peter Norman Osborn decides to put the experiment onto himself, and he ends up surviving rather than Peter Parker. And now that Harry Osborn finds out, he decides to get a suit for one of the suits that his father worked on that he didn't care about, and he puts on the Goblin suit and fights Norman Osborn. It was kind of weird because it's like it's the opposite. It's like Spider-Man is the villain, and the Goblin is the villain. He's the hero. So you have Harry Osborn as a Goblin. They didn't specify what type of Goblin. I'm not sure if it's Hobgoblin or Green Goblin, but it was just a Goblin suit, and he ends up fighting Spider-Man, who just happens to be Norman Osborn, and they end up fighting each other. And as the fighting is going on, one of the spider characters ends up pulling Norman Osborn Spider-Man out of the universe to go help the other spider characters. So he didn't get to finish fighting him, but I really did enjoy this issue because it was like there was some touchy moments with Harry Osborn and Peter Parker and their friendship, and it seems like they had a good relationship. They was detailing in the letter as Harry Osborn is gonna go see what the hell his father has been up to and why did he kill off Peter Parker. Like he does some information as the story's going on, and it's pretty interesting to see what relationship that Harry Osborn and Peter Parker had, because it looked like they had a better relationship in this universe than the actual 616 universe. Because I noticed in the 616 universe, Peter Parker and Harry Osborn's relationship is kind of complicated, and in this universe is different. They actually had a good friendship, and I actually liked seeing a different perspective of that. And it was an interesting alternate universe for me. So that's why I actually gave the book of the week.
Very cool, very
And
cool.
yeah, and the art was good too. Yeah.
Okay. So, Steven, unfortunately, I'm going to blaze through the end of this just because we're getting really pushed for time here.
I think we're almost basically done.
No, that's good. So two other things I want to mention. First of all, on Black Panther, I know I was really negative on it. I do want to say one of the things I did really like about that book was the panel work. So Daniel Acuna's panel work I did like. Little edgy, a little out of the norm, not a bunch of, square panel spreads on every single page, so I did appreciate that. One note on Spectacular Spider-Man also, so Sean Ryan takes creative reins next month, and while I am not familiar with his works, and I'm little concerned, I am going to stay on Spectacular because the they are returning one of my favorite Spider-Man villains of all time, which is Morlun, which, if you remember from the John Romita Jr. run on Spider-Man, was this whole thing about the animal totems, and how, these ancient forces are kind of responsible and culminate in Peter Parker becoming Spider-Man. So, remaining details from this week's past reviews. Honorable mentions this week from Steven go out to Old Man Logan number 48, Old Man Hawkeye number 9, and Justice League Dark number 3. Honorable mentions from me go out to Justice League Odyssey number 1, which I talked about, and Punisher number 2 by Matthew Rosenberg and Simon Kudransky, with really amazing art by Kudransky. I also tweeted this out to Matthew Rosenberg at Ashcan Press, I think is his Twitter handle. I did not realize that he had done the previous run, just as I've never really latched on to who's the talent on the Punisher, because I like it so infrequently. But very impressed that that creative team is looping me back in off of a reboot. Next week, I am going to be talking about... So on the show, I'll be talking about Batman number 56, which is probably the book that I'm looking forward to the most, as we see how the story unfolds after Dick Grayson has been shot in the head by an unknown sniper. I'll also be talking Justice League number 9 and Star Wars number 55. I'll also be reading Deadpool number 5 and Zorro Swords of Hell number 1 by American Mythology Productions. Stephen will be pulling The Walking Dead, Doctor Strange, Superior Octopus number 1, which I'm very curious to hear about. Wonder Woman and Justice League Dark, The Witching Hour number 1, and 2 What Ifs, 1 for Spider-Man and 1 for X-Men. Stephen, any final notes or plugs or anything else we need to cover?
No, I don't think there's anything else. That's about it.
All right, everybody, thanks so much. I do apologize for this bit of rushing at the end, but I need to skip over. And first, I got to get this podcast published, and then I need to get into my regularly scheduled Monday night, late night live stream. I'm already going to be up as late as it is. I'm already going to be up late as it is. So thanks so much for joining in. We will be right back here next week for another episode of What's Your Issue? I can't remember if I called this episode number 1 or episode number 3. I think it's supposed to be episode number 1. So we'll be back here for What's Your Issue? Episode number 2, where we will talk about the books that I just mentioned, designate our best thing that we read that week, and also talk about honorable mentions and queue you up for what we'll be covering the week following. On behalf of myself, Steven, the E2KG Network, Gearworks.com, and the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube, my name is Agasicles Stamas. That's going to do it for this episode for the books that shipped 26 September 2018, and we are out of here.
All right.